Well, here we go. Well, here we go. Well, now, here we go. I'm sitting very far away from my machine, so if my edits, which I do live, are a little choppy, so be it. This is, after all, the So Be It Union. It's funny how the passage of time rearranges the events in your life. On an ongoing basis, they prioritize themselves, they trivialize themselves, you remember things, you forget things. If you're like me, events that took place in chronological order don't necessarily feel like they took place in that chronological order. Some things seem like they just happened the other day, even though they were a long time ago. And some things that just happened seem like they were ages ago. Be that as it may, lately I've been revisiting a project I worked on a long time ago. I started this project in the year 1982 and finished it in the year 1984. And what it consisted of initially was my attempt to record in the year 1982 a 45 RPM record for fun. See, I'm one of those guys who grew up in the era of when the late 50s and early 60s were happening. 45s were still what was hot, hip, happening, and now. And a 45 RPM record is a little record with a big hole in it, and there's one song on each side, and so on and so forth. And when I was a kid, I always fantasized about someday having a 45. Yeah. Well, in 1982, I was able to record one. I paid for the studio time. No, I did not have a record label, and a group of local musicians were very, very kind enough to help me out. Bob Neiswanger, Rob Fetters, Rick Powell, Rick Nyheisel, Dwayne Irvin, and Tim Ivey played drums, guitar, keyboard, sax, and trumpet. And I was able to record this at two different studios. One was Northside Records, and the other one was Group Effort recordings. Both of those studios no longer exist. And it was engineered by several different people. Wayne Hartman, Dan Murphy, Rick Probst. It was a lot of fun. And in my mind, I would record that one record, and that was that on that. But apparently somebody put the bug in my head after the record project was done. Hey, man, you ought to do an album. And for reasons that are murky but eventually happened, over the next 2 years, enough songs were recorded to make an album, and this is the album. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this album before I proceed to expose you to this album. Let's see if I can pause my machine. Okay, so this is the cover of the 45 RPM record recorded in 1982. The two songs were Victim of the Time and I Still Love You. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into the structure of these songs. They seem to come to me for better or for worse, whether they're good or bad. They came to me pretty naturally. The Victim of the Times in 1982 was an anthem for the struggling working man in a very weak economy. Wow, where have we heard that before? And I Still Love You was my country, rock, blues, sort of swing, broken heart anthem that everybody seems to be fond of. To this day, there's those type of songs out there. Now, oh yeah, by the way, the picture on the cover is from the fall of 1969 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Down the street from where I went to art school was a place called Mellon Square, and they shut the fountains off for the winter, so I had someone take my picture in the fountain standing there in the winter. Why not? Yeah, I called the album, which eventually came to be Gorillas on Display. You know why? I was at a zoo. I think it was the Cincinnati Zoo. And I saw a wooden sign with letters burned into it, said Gorillas on Display. So I said, yeah. And I called a make-believe group the Biscuits because it seemed like a bluesy kind of fun thing to do. No deeper thought than that. I drew all this cover on a piece of canvas, framed like a piece of artwork. Then I drew these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little pedestals. And the 5 main contributors, musician-wise, drew a little figure to represent their own interpretation. And the 6th one was an arm, a leg, a head, individual body parts drawn by everybody else who had anything to do with the album. Rob Fetters, where's Rob? Rob Fetters drew that. Rick Powell drew that. I drew that. Rick Nyheisel drew that, and Bob Neiswanger drew that, and anybody else who had anything to do with the record contributed the limbs, the arms, the head, the nose, you name it, on that little guy. Why not? This is the back of the cover. The photograph you see is me, taken in 1961. And the event that was taking place was a mortgage burning party at a local park where I used to live, where my mom and dad used to live. They no longer live there. I no longer live around there. But at 1961, this was down the road from where we lived, and it was a party celebrating someone burning their mortgage. And I whited out the one side and put all the credits on there. This is what you call your record sleeve. Your record sleeve, the inside envelope inside the cover that holds the actual album. And that picture was taken in 1963 in my cousin's backyard in New Jersey around Halloween. That was his ghost that him and his mom made, a balloon, a little bowed piece of wood, and a sheet hanging over it in a tree, and so on and so forth. Now, this drawing has absolutely nothing to do with the record album project, except for the fact that it's an inspirational reminder to me. There once upon a time was a photograph that this drawing is based on. Was taken in my bedroom in the early 60s, probably around 63, 64, somewhere in there. And that's the drums I would be playing. And my cousin Ronnie had a Gibson guitar, and he would play guitar and I would play drums, and we had our own make-believe rock band every summer going on, and we thought we're playing music. We are stars. So I like to keep this hanging around just to keep me aware of the fact that once upon a time I had a perspective that wasn't so goofy and anal about music and the music business and all that good stuff. And it's a great little piece of memorabilia that I'm really glad I still have. There was a point in my time when I actually worked in the legitimate big-time music business, and I took with me to that job the innocence and naivete I had when I was a kid, thinking, what fun it is to do all this stuff. Long story short, by the time I got out of that business, I found out that most of the business end of the music business is no fun at all and not conducive to creating good music in general. So that's really what this project was morphed over a long period of time out of my desire to do a music project that the way I thought in my head it could be done. The entire project was fun. It was done, even though it took 2 years, the actual recording sessions were quick. We would do at least 2 songs per session. It just took us a long time to get together to have those sessions. And the procedure was I would bring a cassette tape to the studio, and that would be the first time anybody would hear it, and we would construct and record the song based on that cassette, 2 per session, until the album was done. One of the cuts, which I'll get to later, is a live cut that was actually done in a bar in Cincinnati, Ohio, but that's another story that we'll get to when we get to it. The songs are not on the album in the order in which they were recorded because I tried to structure it like a mixtape, you know, what would go good with what kind of thing after all was said and done. The first thing on the album is, let me walk over here, grab my album cover. Gorillas on Display, the title cut, is an instrumental of sorts. And it was put together on the spot, no rehearsal, and the whole thing just took a couple of takes until getting my part right was the hardest part. And I wrote the dang thing. When the project rolled into the big studio, a few extra cohorts were added to the project on top of the original ensemble of musicians. You heard Mr. Ray Heckman playing sax on that cut, and he'll play on some more. Later on, you hear some more guitar from a fellow by the name of Scott Covert, and some extra drumming by a guy named Todd Remy. Next up is Optical Confusion, written almost 35, well, let's see, several decades ago, about how the television can pollute your mind with propaganda if you're not careful. I guess today I'll just have to add the internet.
tonight. I'm yearning, I'm burning, I'm turning around. The videos just bring me down. Concerning, learning, I can be profound. This video village, it might be your town. Yeah.
Interesting trivial note on that song is all those weird percussive sounds you heard were improvised on the spot by various members after they played their legitimate parts. And the organ sound is from a little Yamaha kids instrument for teaching chord structure. Yeah. Next up is a song called I Still Love You. If I need to attribute to anything, it is my anthem to every country western bar room in the United States of America that has a jukebox in it.
First you made fun of me, then you went out on me, then you turned your back on me. I still love you. These times are changing fast, relationships don't last, and we find our joy in the past. I still love you. Some days I wake up calling your name. Some days I think you do the same. Some days I can hardly stand the pain. Thank God they leave as fast as they can. Wow! My friends keep telling me that I should let you be, that you're no good for me. I still love you. Go ahead, laugh at me. So what? I can see it really doesn't bother me. I still love you. Yeah! No tune, no harmony seems to come out of me when the light don't shine on me. I still love you. I hope you're happy and you're free. I hope you don't get lost at sea. I hope you will remember me because I still love you.
The interesting bits of trivia on that song, a few. One, it was, yes, from the original single. It was recorded at Northside Recording here in Cincinnati, once owned by a fellow named Paul Kreft. And for several years before I started this project, I spent about 4 years on the road as part of the audio crew of a band named J. Giles, the J. Giles Band. You may or may not have heard of them. This song was done in the style of, as a somewhat obscure tribute to them. Next up is a little short thing and a song. First is Soul Tro, followed by Soul Surfin'. I was one of those guys who fought the battle between surfing music and rock and roll. I ended up liking them both. So Soul Surfin', it was my tribute to, instrumental surf music. And Soul Tro, which leads into Soul Surfin', we had the luxury of a multi-track recording when we made this record. And anybody who was in the room, their voice is on a track of Soul Tro saying whatever they felt like saying. So you figure out what the hidden meaning is. The only thing I left out was backwards tracking. Nothing's backwards.
Waves of emotion break over the sands of your mind, causing curls of ecstasy to break. These are feelings you've got
Some interesting trivia about soul surfing. Every bit of the screaming, yelling, and hollering and random noises you heard were done by everybody who played on the track, who was still around when the track was done. We added that after the fact, impromptu, totally improvised. Secondly, I believe it was Rick Neuheisel who said halfway through this recording, we need a sax part that sounds like somebody's cousin is playing the saxophone. We had in the studio that day a very, very fine jazz saxophone player by the name of Sandy Susskind. Unbeknown to Sandy, we put him in an isolation booth and told him, we're going to play the track and you figure out what you want to play, and then, we'll do it. And he did it, and we kept that track. The sax part is Sandy figuring out what he might play, and it ended up on the final track, and by golly, it sounds like somebody's cousin is playing sax. So it all worked out fine. Next up is a song called Radio, Radio, Radio. Sometimes friend and sometimes foe. Radio. Yeah, the interesting bit of trivia on radio, in my mind, is the fact that all that background percussion is put on there by the musicians who played legitimate instruments on the track as an afterthought. They just didn't know they could be rhythm guys, but they were. And it's really funny what influences you to do things when you go into the studio. I would imagine this is not that uncommon. Back in the days in the early 1980s, when we were recording this song, I was probably on the way to the recording session when I heard a disco song by the Rolling Stones. Now, in my mind, the Rolling Stones were a 60s rock and roll band, and I kind of had a sarcastic tilt on their disco stuff. And in that song, "And Knows My Name" was my impersonation of Mick Jagger in his disco era. Does that mean anything? I don't know. That's what I did, though. Well, next up is music. This song is about all the evolution music takes in all our lives, from the beginning times to the end times. It's a musical song about music. And so inside one, a couple interesting trivia bits about that song is a lot of the people playing that day contributed ideas to that song, and I believe it was Rick Neuheisel suggested that we put a callback, an answer to the when the singer sings at the backup singers would answer him. That was his idea, and it was a great idea, I do believe. And there's a lyric in there, pictures on my mirror of things I'd like to play. When I was a kid, I actually would tape pictures of musical instruments to my mirror because there was no way my family could afford to buy them. And now on to side two. Song called This Used to Be Fun, which was written as an answer to the reality of what I found the music business to be versus the fantasy that I thought it was. It was what it was. It wasn't what I thought it was. Was it? Interesting trivia on that song is the sound of like a car winding out was added by local Cincinnati musician Pete Mayer and his, at that time, recently acquired whammy bar. And the voices that go, was everybody who happened to be there that day, whether they were there to record or not, heard it in front of a microphone and told to go up, go down, and go neutral. And they only had one chance to do it, and you just heard it. Next up is 20 Years, another song about how everything can change whether you like it to or not. There's a ship and it's going down.
One, two, wait a minute. One, two, one, there's a ship and it's going down. Waves are breaking all around. After 20 years, it just might drown. I see land. Sails hang from lack of wind, waiting for the wind to begin. After 20 years, this is a sin. I see land. In the 60s, the wind was sound. In the 70s, it just died down. After 20 years, there's none around. I see land. And I'm so sorry that you had to see the hole in the bottom that lets in the sea. Voices cry, must be wrong. Maybe I was wrong all along. After 20 years, it's just a song. I see land. And I'm so sorry that you couldn't be in a better position to enjoy the sea. And ship's skip, he is a clown, says that nothing more but going down. After 20 years, he makes me proud. I see land. And I'm so sorry that I can't be there to greet you when you eat the sea. Without me.
To me, in my mind, the most interesting bit of trivia about that song, 20 years it just played, if you picked up on the part where the singer goes, voices cry, and everybody goes, you must be wrong. They put that part in live while I was doing my vocal. And I had to anticipate ending them saying that and starting singing again for it to work. And we did it in one take. I said, "Voices cry," and they all yelled, "You must be wrong." And we just kept going, and the rest is history, as they say. Next up is Victim of the Times, the other song that was on the original Biscuits 45. To me, the most interesting trivia about this song is there's a section of Cincinnati called North Side. And I don't remember why I was walking the sidewalks of North Side that day, but that one day prior to this session when we recorded Victim of the Times, at Group Effort Recording, the song literally came into my head complete. It just popped into my head as I was walking down the street. And when that usually happens to me, I forget it by the end of the day. For whatever reason, this time I remembered it. And here's what we got from that.
Buddy, won't you lend me a dime? I'm broken, hungry, and it ain't no crime. I've been working all day, but my bills have eaten up all my pay. I will repay your dime. I'm just a victim of the time. Hey, buddy, won't you buy me a drink? I'm sick and tired, and I don't wanna think. All day, but my boss has got all to say. I will replace the wine. I'm just a victim of the time. Well, the world keeps spinning faster. To slow down would be disaster. This ain't no victimless crime. I'm being cut down in my prime.
The most interesting bit of trivia on that song, in my mind, is that song was recorded at the original location of Group Effort Studios. And I'm pretty sure the engineers were Wayne Hartman and Dan Murphy. And I wasn't happy with the vocal track. So they suggested, hey, you have an extra track, do it again a second time. Well, I wasn't happy with that one either. When we were playing them back, we started sliding the two up in and out, mixing the two together. And I like that. So what you hear, for better or for worse, on that song is two vocal tracks, not edited with like cut out and pasted together. It's human hands on the sliders, bringing one up and one down and one up and one down all the way through the song. I think that's pretty cool. Now, there's a little tiny thing next called In This World, which just was a tape loop that we had fun with, and it leads into a live version of the song Jailhouse Rock. That was recorded at a bar in Cincinnati, Ohio in the early 1980s. There was a band called the Raisins, who are all of those guys are on this record. The name of the bar was Pastime Saloon. It no longer exists. It was below street level in Clifton, Ohio. And I used to, at that point in time, every once in a while, get up on stage with the guys and do jailhouse rock just for fun. That night, I did it. Well, I think it was Carl Armstrong or Bob Niswonger. One of those guys brought along a TIAC reel-to-reel tape recorder that we had plugged into the mixing board just for fun. I preset my levels and went up on stage. I was mixing the sound out front. I guess I neglected to tell you that. So I preset my levels on the mixing board out front, and the place was packed. It was a bar, hot, sweaty, people everywhere. So what you're about to hear is a live recording recorded at a bar in Cincinnati, Ohio, and nobody is at the controls of the sound equipment. If somebody would have reached over and grabbed something, there would have been nothing we could have done about it. But nothing is mixed. This is exactly freestyling, as they say. It doesn't get more free than this style.
In this world, there's only one thing you can do. You can become your dreams, or your dreams can become you. Going to a party in the county jail. People out there, they began to wild. They began to smoke and up and began to swing. You're the 190 down jail, but swing that rock. Hey, what? Everybody in the whole cell block. Woo! Hey, jailhouse rock, hey. It's time to blow it, and it's time to blow it. It'll blow it, blow it on this night trombone. Over in the corner, go crash through back. Over in the street with the purple gang. Let's rock. Hey, rock. Everybody in that whole cell block. Dance to the jailhouse rock, yeah. Had that sitting on a block of stone. Sitting in the corner, he was all alone. Oh, said, buddy, don't you be no sweat. Everybody, buddy's away in jail. Hey, rock. Everybody in that whole cell block. Hey, to the jailhouse rock, yeah. Number 47 said to number 3. You need to the jail, but I am on the tree. Go with me tonight with your company. All to the jailhouse rock with me. Rock. Yeah, rock. Everybody in the whole cell block. Hey, to the jailhouse rock one time. Dance to the jailhouse rock. 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 Everybody in the whole cell block. Hey, to the jailhouse rock.
Got one more set. Stick around. Thank you.
And yes, I actually did pay the publishers to use Jailhouse Rock on this record album. Last up is a song called "Heart." A few years before I recorded this project, or I always got to say we, because I am just a starter dough. I'm definitely not the finished product. This is a song about my brother, Bruce, who passed away in a car accident a few years before this project was completed, and he was to say he was one of a kind is putting it mildly. He was a unique individual. And, oh, by the way, Sandy Susskind, who was chorused into playing the cousin-sounding sax part on Soul Surfin', redeems himself quite admirably on this track. He plays the tenor sax solo beautifully on this song. Todd Remy plays drums, and here it is.
Life's confusion, fed by illusion, always tore you apart. Fear of intrusion, believing delusion kept you from getting a start. And though you're gone, the memory lives on, because I remember the heart. Growing older, put weight on your shoulder, and we were moving apart. If I were older, I would have been bolder, but I didn't know where to start. And though you're gone, the memory lives on, because I remember the heart. You wanted a world that was right, and that kept scaring you, but you were daring to. A battle between the dark and the light. Sky blue, love true, light new will remind me of you. Thought-provoking, chain smoking, to you life was art. Seldom joking, slow poking, I really don't know where to start. And though you're gone, the memory lives on, because I remember the heart. Life's confusion might be illusion, we should not drift apart. Fear of intrusion is just a delusion, keeping us all from getting a start. And though you're gone, the memory lives on, when we remember the heart.
The very last bit of trivia is before the Biscuits packed up their bags and went away into the annals of history. There were, in fact, two other songs recorded that I still have the tapes of, but never made into the light of day. And I hope someday to, at least for my sake, get them all in one place at one time. But this is a fantasy that may or may not have been reality, but this is what I done when I